Namaskar. It is my proud privilege to welcome Shri Sheshendra Sharma to this Meet the Author program jointly organized by India International Center and the Sahitya Academy. When Sheshendra Sharma first entered in the Telugu poetic world, the situation was very grim. The old masters had practically all departed. The popularity of Dasharathi was on the decline. The naked poets were overpowered by their own borrowed ideology. Contemporaneity had entered the poetic world as if poetry was a newspaper to be read and forgotten. Some poets talked about revolution and commitment, and as a result, wrote bad poetry. Because when you try to change the world, you do not change the world. You just write bad literature. However, poetry is a strange amalgam of the personal and the social. To deny one of these in order to cherish the other is to be denied by both. Sheshendra was one of the foremost in Telugu to exhibit this amalgam of values, both social and poetical. He kept himself away from the extreme experimentation of the West. He could do so because he always felt a partner to the Western writers like Camus, Kafka, T.S. Eliot, Rimbaud, and others. Not a shishya to be dictated by their Western gurus, and hence he could write, and I quote, Rimbaud all of a sudden became very pensive and said, Mahakavi Baudelaire was the first visionary, king of kings, the true God. Then Sheshendra says, I told him, Rimbaud, look at that. There is the sun rising. The sun also sets there. From this end to the other end, these three sandhya, three mystic evenings, are in fact the magic of the senses. Maro tiraniki itiralu e tri sandhyala indriyala indrajalam. To save oneself from this enchantment, Valmiki transforms himself into Baudelaire and Baudelaire into Valmiki, all controlled by Trikal, the three cosmic time. Unquote. A little mysterious, but this kind of imaginary conversation in esoteric language is to be found in abundance in Sheshendra's poetry. Sheshendra's knowledge of Sanskrit literature, poetics, have helped him to develop a poetic consciousness which is both modern and traditional, social and individualistic. Sheshendra knows how to create an image which encompasses the time present and the time past, the real and the ideal, the social and the mystical. In one of his poems, he says, and I quote, in the window, the evening and two birds combine to make an oil painting. Slowly, the birds become two dots, and finally, a crimson sky is left hanging alone. As darkness thickens, a time comes in our beings when all objects become one, and the horizontal lines in us rise and stand up as vertical lines. In your world, another world rises, and in the world, yet another world. But the thing which intrigues me is that how could such a good poet be equally a good critic? In fact, he bagged the Sahitya Academy Award on a book of criticism. This is a rare combination in the field of literature. He wrote a manifesto of the modern poetry, a brilliant piece of critical understanding of literature, and gave importance to metaphorical quality of poetry. One of his popular metaphors is tree. In a poem, he says, "Man is a moving tree whose roots are his feet. Had I remained a tree, then every year I would have enjoyed Vasant. But ever since I became a man, all springs of this earth have turned their faces against me." Is it a fact? Which book of poetry is his best? Does he believe in any ideology? Is his critical mind a hindrance to his poetry? What were the various milestones in his Kavi Yatra? Does it think that literature is slighted today? All these questions, I hope, will be answered by Sheshendra, and we'll also present some of his poems in original Telugu and in translation into English and Hindi. I once again welcome you, sir, and welcome you, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us to listen to a great Indian poet who writes in Telugu, and for whom poetry comes and does not allow him to breathe. Sheshendraji. You will be reading, it will be better. You can keep it.
अपनी मित्रों, जब कभी मैं मुख्तलिफ ज़बानों के सदस्यों की सभा को मुखातिब करना पड़ता, मैं एक दुविधा में पड़ जाता हूँ। कौन सी ज़बान में बात करूँ? वो इसलिए है कि हमेशा मैं हिंदी में ही बात करना मेरा नियम रहा अब तक। आज उस नियम का उल्लंघन करके मैं अंग्रेज़ी में बात करूंगा, क्योंकि अंग्रेज़ी में ये स्पीच तैयार करके आया हूं, वरना मैं हिंदी में ही बात करता था। और कोई अगर मुझे तेलुगु में बात करो या तेलुगु में सुनाओ ऐसा कहे तो मुझे बहुत गुस्सा आता। जी, हिंदी में सुनाऊंगा, लेकिन ये एक सजेशन के वजह से मैं अंग्रेजी में लिख के आया ना, तो वो पहले पढ़ूंगा, उसके बाद कविता आपको हिंदी में ही सुनाऊंगा। तेलुगु में भी सुनाऊंगा, क्योंकि तेलुगु वाले गुस्से में आएंगे। जी, आप क्या कह रहे हैं? मुझे सुनने आ रहा है कि पहले तेलुगु में सुना दीजिए, फिर बाद में अंग्रेजी हिंदी। कविता, तेलुगु पोएम, जब मैं पोएम सुनाता हूँ उस वक्त तेलुगु ही मैं प्रेफरेंस दूंगा। ये मुझे जी क्या कर रहे हैं? पहले एक तेलुगु पोएम हो जाए आपके पहले। शुभारंभ। సముద్రం ఒకడి కాళ్ళ దగ్గర కూర్చుని మొరగదు, తుఫాను గొంతు చిత్తమరడం ఎరగదు, పర్వతం ఎవడికి వంగి సలాం చేయదు. నేనింత ఒక పిడికెడు మట్టే కావచ్చు, కానీ కలమెత్తితే నాకు ఒక దేశపు జెండా కొన్నంత పొగరుంది. किंकियाता नहीं समंदर किसी के चरणों में बैठकर, नहीं जानती जी हुजूरी तूफान की आवाज, पर्वत नहीं करता सलाम किसी को झुककर. हो सकता है मैं धूल हूं एक मुट्ठी भर, लेकिन मैं जब अपना कलम उठाता हूं मुझे उतना ही अहम होता है जितना कि एक देश के लहराते हुए झंडे में. तो शुभारंभ तो हो गया. अगर आप अनुमति दिए तो मैं ये पढ़ना शुरू करूं. इसका शीर्षक है Poetry and Odyssey. Poetry is an adventure, an expedition. I am a victim of beauty. It chases me like a hunter chases the wild animal in the forest. It is not that if it finds me on its own, I always walk into its trap willingly like a fool. Because life, the catalyst in life's milieu, incites me to search for something that I do not know in every created object. Usually, when my vision sights that something, I experience a strange pleasure not comparable to any pleasure familiar to all people. I cannot face this pleasure, and I feel at once vanquished before it. It is such a total surrender to it that it is equal to instantaneous death. Sometime later, I come out of it limping due to the unremitting monster of life knocking at the door of my consciousness. Then perhaps I am said to be living, although I feel I was pulled out of that state of being like the dentist pulls out the tooth. I am an addict of this killer pleasure, and my so-called life is but a string of alternating moments of living and dying. Why do I search for such pleasure so obstinately? And why do I die in the process? And why does it not deter me from the search? It is strange but true. Maybe it happens to many other people too, but the number in the world, I suppose, is infinitesimally small. Can you explain the experience of this pleasure? No. Sometimes I doubt whether it is pleasure at all, because even deep sorrow, either mine or more so of the other person, catches me in the grip of a similar state of mind. You melt now into some primordial liquids and flow away, so to say. It may be rather like an intense involvement with something. It is more poignant when that something is other than your subjective self. Perhaps Buddha passed through this moment when he saw an old and shriveled man and a dead body on the street and plummeted into a lightning decision to leave his wife, his child, his kingdom, to go and melt away like a granule of salt in the vast ocean of humanity. Or probably when he was crucified and was about to give up his ghost, Jesus also must have had an identical experience and cried out, lifting his face towards the heavens, "O Father, forgive me, forgive them, for they know not what they do." One thing is certain, this experience is inexplicable in the lines of Paul Rock's. What a relief. This experience is inexplicable, like in the lines of Paul Rox, a French poet, well-known poet. His lines I am reciting here. Like a simple man scattering himself in flute. What a beautiful expression. Like a simple man scattering himself in the flute. The shepherd descends the hills adolescents, his sheep following him with 2 vine branches for ears and bunches of grapes for udders. His sheep follow him walking vines. His sheep follow him walking vines. Or like Paul Valery, his lines I am quoting. "O supple wooden flesh, O supple wooden flesh," when you make when before the fiddle is shaped, fiddle, before it is shaped, its beginning, Paul Valery is taking here. "O supple wooden flesh, you must twist and untwist yourself, complain without breaking, and give the winds the voice they look for in disorder." These lines are only felt, involved in, and enjoyed in the metaphysical sense of the term. That is why, still in the process, you seem to be groping in the disorder of creation to find the light of order. You are deeply absorbed but not fulfilled. That is why you keep groping, you keep going to it repeatedly. The architecture of clouds on the treetops, on the housetops, or the rains of falling leaves in the autumn may not mean anything to the common eye, for they have no geometrical or symmetric or any deliberated or calibrated shapes or forms. But the searching eye is captured by them for endless duration of time. They are irresistibly absorbing phenomenon, leading the viewer to an absolute state of oblivion, where his being is virtually abolished. A universe which is a constant flux of occurrences of being and non-being falls in the ultimate analysis into 2 parts, the subject and the object. I, the subject, views the object, the surrounding universe, which is a bewildering sight. This is the reason why, in the eyes of the child who comes out of the womb and sees the world for the first time, you find those bewildering looks of search in strange things. Although the child grows and gets familiar with the world and the millions of objects of creation, gathering experience as adult, the mystery of creation still persists, even if the child grows, leaping from the known to the unknown. It is this everlasting unknownness, always left over at the end of the quest, that keeps the wayfarer on the path, eternally trekking, deeply involved in the quest of the unknown. Perhaps it is this unknown that is felt by the searcher as beauty. tantalizing him endlessly. It is a feeling of something touching his senses and eluding the grip of his faculty of cognition. It is a feeling of something touching his senses and eluding the grip of his faculty of cognition. It is always doubtful whether he captured it at all. He finds it here, he finds it there, he finds it everywhere. In the sunsets, in the sunrises, in the clouds, in the breezes, in the birds, in the flowers, in the crowds, in solitudes, in the silences, and so on. And yet, the thirst for it is unquenched, and his search remains an adventure or a real odyssey. It is the strange, tantalizing beauty that gives sometimes the seeker, the adventurer, the rare flash of what may be the truth. The rare flash of what may be the truth. That this baffling phenomenon called creation is perhaps not a conglomeration of many different objects, but is only one object manifesting in myriads of forms. Gaudapada was one such adventurer who said in his Advaita Karikas, Maya matra midam dvaitam, advaitam paramarthataha. In the quest, all that you see as several is illusion, but actually it is only one. It is also possible that another seeker's experience might give him a different flash of the truth. It is a complex problem of an intellectual hide and seek. But the puzzle has never been solved ever since the dawn of mind on this planet, though some have laid claims for conclusive solutions. So fulfillment of this subject remains only an utopian dream. At any rate, that is my experience of beauty at this point of my life, which is long enough for such an expedition. I always felt that everything hurts me and there is nothing to cajole me. This is the common state of or fate of a seeker. But then, if you do not seek anything, and if you do not sharpen your eye with curiosity, if you lull your mind into sleep by gorging on only familiarities of life, you are one of the creatures of creation in the usual sense of the term, namely biped. One word of caution here. The word beauty should not be taken in the commonplace sense of the term. It is, in fact, the philosophical quintessence of the intense quest of the unusually evolved men who are after something yet unknown. It is this state of being that these strange men see. It is in this state of being that these strange men see objects of creation differently. And when they speak out of what they see, we feel it strange and interesting. This is what Rudrata really means in his shloka, defining the genesis of genius. Manasi susamadhini visphuranam anekadha bhideyascha aklishtani padani cha vibhanti yasyam asau shaktihi. This, in fact, is the native place of the symbols, the metaphors, and the images. Vamana dwelt much earlier on this point in similar terms. Arthasya darshanam drishtihi. Arthasya darshanam drishtihi. Of course, there are many other people who have dealt on the same subject, but he was the earliest man, perhaps. Arthasya darshanam drishtihi samadhi karanatvat samadhihi avahitam hi chittam arthan pashyati chuktam purastat. This is about Vamana. Well, this is the philosophical foundation of the poet, who is the seeker of order in disorder, and called a poet in common parlance. I would now give you a few illustrations of my own experience, though I have desisted from doing so all my life. It is rather difficult to ruminate on hazy memories of the dizzy, bygone experiences. Once, my wife and I were traveling by car from Bangalore to Ooty. We were passing through the Bandipur forest, which was also a hilly track, when the orb of sun slipped into the horizon. A thin layer of light and darkness spread over the earth, and the car was running fast. Sometime later, something in me forced me to shout, "Stop the car!" The car stopped, and I came out. It was a strange, mysterious experience devouring me. And everything was still. The forest, the hills, the birds, all living and non-living beings. In the clear, articulating, dark blue sky, a star appeared, as if thrown up by the west from somewhere. It was staring at me, this star which was thrown up by the west. It was staring at me. Very soft and cool layers of breeze were wafting from the forest, which looked like a silent crowd of trees, running at me and staring at me as a strange creature. The profoundness of the silence, the real mischief maker, the hero of the evening's expedition, threw a shroud of mystery and took me away into unknown realms of existence. Where I felt like changing myself into a tree and grow branches to grab the totality of the feeling of the forest. May I repeat this with your permission? The profoundness of silence, the real mischief maker, the hero of the evening's expedition, threw a shroud of mystery and took me away into unknown realms of existence, when I felt like changing myself into a tree and grow branches to grab the totality of the feeling of the forest. Then probably the voice of my interior began to speak. Instantly, I rushed to the car, took my ever-ready notebook and pen, and recorded this speech in human tones. They are like this. Chased away by the human bazaars, silence fled into the hills. Time flows like water slipping out of the fingers. Seasons like spiders weave lines in the valleys of the eyes. Drop by drop, when I sip the silence of the hills, I cannot even excuse my own heart, which pulsates disturbing beats in my breast. I measure the forest. I measure the forest. I measure the forest with the song of a bird or with the melody of a meandering brook. I measure the forest with the song of a bird or with the melody of a meandering brook. When the saffron flames, when the saffron flames when the saffron flames run amok like crowds of sannyasins in the forest, I embrace the bodies of the trees and listening to their painful heartbeats, I cry loudly. Now this is the experience which I noted on paper. And then another time, we were passing on our way to Kurnool from Hyderabad. After passing a few villages and some village-like towns far flung from each other and tapering down as we advance, we were finally launched on a voyage of limitless arid land stretching from horizon to horizon. The sky was furiously unleashing ruthless sun. Not a bird, not a living creature anywhere to be seen. Sorry. At an astronomical distance, a little dot of a tree could be seen as the symbol of stoic silence that stretched over miles and miles of distance. A half-naked man holding a plow was seen moving slowly forward, tilling the unyielding earth. Tilling the unyielding hard soil. He is the only living creature in the immense void encircled by the horizon. The trees, the birds, the winds, all seem to have fled away, leaving this hapless creature called tiller alone. Again, I had to stop the car and come out, stand staring at him, sinking into thought, leading to unfathomable abyss of the unknown again. When the car honked the horn, I came out of those primordial waters of subconsciousness like a frogman with the snails and pearls of the netherworld. On the insistence of my wife, I transmuted my experience to silence. On the insistence of my wife, I transmuted my experienced silence into speech. Since I pass through the experiences every now and then, I am one to overlook noting them in words each time. Hence, the insistence of my wife, my constant companion, becomes the sole cause of the bulk of my poetry. In the present case, the lines are as follows. He who bears the plough on his shoulders and earns his hunger alone earns the right to appease his hunger. If the sorrow of the crops that grew this year is not mitigated in the coming year, only fish bearing sickles will grow in the fields. जो आदमी अपने कंधे पर हल उठाकर भूख कमाता है, उसी का हक है भूख मिटाने का। जो आदमी अपने कंधे पर हल उठाकर भूख कमाता है, उसी का हक है भूख मिटाने का। अगर जो फसल इस वर्ष उगी उसका दुख न मिटे, अगले वर्ष खेतों में मात्र दरातिया थामे हुए हाथ उगेंगे। Once it so happened that I was unduly insulted by my superior officer. This is a very interesting tale. It also incidentally reveals I was a servant of the government. The word servant is a country of a nation of servants. They like to be servants. It is not in their blood to rebel. Genetically weak-kneed, boneless. Once it so happened that I was unduly insulted by my superior officer, who was by nature arrogant and extremely conscious of his power of office. We have many such Lilliputs strutting in millions in our government bureaucracy. I was very upset, returned home, and on the persuasion of my wife, agreed to apply for some leave and left for Ooty, my abode of peace and my ashram. As the car was proceeding to the airport, I saw on the way a woman barely clothed, literally in rags, holding a shriveled up naked child and begging. My attention was at once arrested. Stopped the car, took a deep look at it, keeping a rupee in the palm of her stretching hand. In the meanwhile, I heard, reporting time is nearing, come, come. Then I said, the child in the womb, better it remains in the womb itself in our country. Otherwise, if it comes out and cries with hunger, the people of this land will show the way to the footpaths, but not to the fields. जो बच्चा गर्भ में है इस देश में, बेहतर है कि वो वही रहे. यदि बाहर निकलकर वो बच्चा अगर बाहर निकलकर भूख से बिलबिलाएगा, तो यहाँ के लोग उसे बताएंगे फुटपाथ की ओर, खेतों की ओर नहीं. Then it began to revolve in my mind. This scene didn't dissolve. It remained there and began to revolve in my mind like a whirlpool, and then came the words, look, that child that descended to the earth, look, that child that descended to the earth holding heavens in both fists is sleeping like a tear on empty stomach. All the metropolises are standing by, hanging their heads in shame. Oh, Rosebush, don't sing if you have any shame. Vomit all those bulbuls from your throat. इसे हिंदी में सुनाऊं? अगर चाहे तो सुनाऊंगा. वह निष्कपट शिशु जो इस धरती पर उतरा, स्वर्गों को लेकर दोनों मुट्ठियों में, देखो सो रहा है खाली पेट एक आंसू बनकर. ऐ गुलाब के कुंज, यदि तुम्हें शर्म हो, तुरंत वमन कर लो तुम्हारे जो उन बुलबुलों को जो तुम्हारे गले में है. ये तकरीबन, मुझे पूरा याद नहीं आ रहा है. The car passed some more distance when I saw the monstrous structure of the government secretariat, in front of which, on the roadside, gulmohar trees were in full bloom. It was spring. Yet it looked to me like a diabolically wrong juxtaposition of two diametrically opposite things. Like the Greek Sibyl, all along the route I was mumbling undecipherable speech, and when I turned my head and saw the secretariat, I shouted. I shouted. Now it is not even abuse. From head to foot, from my whole body is blowing dreadful hurricanes of blood and fire. My hand rises to smash to smithereens that huge structure with one stroke of my fist. Exhausted, I look at the trees pitiably and say, I do not want poetry. I want a bomb crammed with 1,000 earthquakes. Seeing and breathing carbon dioxide, this obnoxious civilization. Why those trees bear flowers? Why don't they bear bullets in their branches? What do you find there if you look at me like this? What do you find there if you look at me like this? Alive, I am mortal. Dead, I am immortal. O bird, do not sing your song here. Fly away in search of your own green hills and forests. A poet can give any number of such experiences. But here, any more of them will be redundant. It is enough to say, I guess that poet is a picture of storms of colors which give you luminous glimpses of his inner world. How many fascinating dreams I dream often. How many visions of men and women of earth, of the creation I get. How many ravishing desires infest my being to fashion and pattern the world at the point of my will. How many impulses and instincts goad me and lead me to fantastic articulation of speechless metaphors and dumb symbols helplessly swimming in the dormant waters of my consciousness. They all seem to be the natural citizens of the psychic realm of volcanic men like me, susceptible to sporadic paroxysms of expression. Thank you very much. I am really very sorry. I myself felt the paper was a little longer. Pardon?
Will you like to sit and read the poem? That will be better.
Unless you issue an order like that, I would prefer this posture for speaking and reading. And you don't mind, I will. Now, you wanted me Telugu to be Telugu. You see, it has been my experience over years. It is still in my eyes when I was in a Kavi Sammelan in Calcutta. And when my turn came, I began to recite in Hindi. At once, a group of people from somewhere, perhaps the group was large enough, they said, no. Then what should I do? You must recite in English. And then one or two voices wanted in Telugu. Then the man whoever was presiding, he justified all these noises. And he explained to me, though I said, it is only because of this kind of people that the country is on the brink of getting broken into pieces. Because they are becoming prisoners of their languages, giving undue importance to languages. After all, a poet has no language. The language that you speak in the in the daily parlance, and the language that he uses in literature, they are two different things. And the language of poet can be shifted, poetry is different from language. Poetry can be shifted from language to language. कवि के लिए कोई भाषा नहीं है, जैसा भगवान के लिए कोई भाषा नहीं है। कवि की भाषा क्या है आखिर? प्रतीक, बिंब, अलंकार। अगर आप भाषा में से इन तीनों को निकाल दीजिए, फिर क्या बचता उसमें? जो बचता है उसे आप कविता कह सकते हैं? नहीं। तो कवि की भाषा ये है, ये सामग्री, प्रतीक, बिंब, अलंकार, इन चीजें। और कवि इंसान से ताल्लुक रखना चाहता है, संपर्क करना चाहता है, भाषाओं के दीवारों को तोड़कर, लांघकर उस तरफ जाना चाहता है। लेकिन इस दुर्भाग्य देश के लोग इतना प्यार करते अपनी जबानों को, मैं बोल नहीं सकता हूँ, उस जबान को उसमें कैद होकर इतना बहुत एंजॉय करते हैं, महत्वपूर्ण चीज समझते हैं भाषा को। तो खैर मैं कुछ नहीं कर सकता हूँ, मेरा जो ख्याल है उसे व्यक्त किया बस। तो तेलुगु से शुरू करूँगा। वो कलकत्ता में जो जज प्रेसिडेंट इन आवाज़ों को जस्टिफाई किया, उनका कारण क्या है मालूम? अरे तेलुगु में सुनाइए एक, क्योंकि मैंने पूछा आप समझ सकते क्या? मैं नहीं समझ सकता। फिर क्यों पूछते हो? नहीं साहब ऐसा नहीं, उसका नाद